Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Digital and Social Media Sports Podcast. I am your host, Neil Horowitz. You can find me on Twitter at NJH287, also on LinkedIn, where I post more content. Visit the website, dsmsports.net, for more episodes and content, and of course, check out the podcast on all your favorite podcast platforms. Awesome show for you guys today. It's perfect timing with the National Rugby League in Australia. It is grand final week, and I am lucky to be joined by Reece Carter. He is the social content manager for the NRL, for the National Rugby League's main office when it comes to social media content, and just a tremendous conversation about doing the most with your resources, learning more about Australian strategy and social media, where the NRL fits, what their goals are, how they work, how they make budgetary decisions. Just a ton of gold in this interview with Reece, so stick around for that. But first, before we get to the interview, just this episode's kind of opening thought. And that is looking at the recent announcement from Disney, which I've read about in Ad Age, creating a bit of a creator collective. Basically, they are choosing or inviting others to come and submit their application to become part of this creator collective. They are working with some more quote unquote established creators that are relatively minor influencers in the TikTok space, but they're also taking just sort of random people with a smaller following that are not as well established yet. And it really just speaks to the idea of, if you look around all the social networks these days, every single one has a creator fund or a creator strategy or more and more tools to help creators, to attract creators, to make their platform the one where creators can thrive and where they want to spend their time, because that's what attracts users. That's what attracts engagement. That's the name of the game. And I think what's interesting is that Disney said, well, look at the social networks. We're not a social platform necessarily, but we can create our own creator network too. We have clout. We have resources. We can offer creators something unique, something original, something distinct. And so if you are with an organization, with a sports team, with a sports entity that can offer those same things, can offer an attractive platform, offer fostering creative skills and ideas, it's kind of cool to take that concept and imagine what it can mean for a league or for a team. You're starting to see a lot more of that collaboration with real fans, whether it's in the form of focus groups or the sporadic entry of sort of the Fan Art Friday, so to speak. But what if you attracted and recruited a creator collective? You can obviously pay a full-time creator whatever, $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year to churn out content all the time. There's certainly merit in that. You can also think about what you can do with a budget for a collective of creators, and all of a sudden now you're really fostering and developing and having a great bit of original content and creative skill at your disposal. So it's an interesting idea, obviously one to think through, but that is this episode's kind of opening thought of looking at what Disney is doing with their creator collective. You can read again about it all across the internet, but I read the article in Ad Age, and something to think about and ponder. But more importantly, stick around because you're going to enjoy this conversation with Reece Carter of the NRL. Right back, and I'm joined by today's guest, someone I've told him I've had him on the podcast for a while, someone I've known for a pretty good amount of time now. Today's guest is Reece Carter. He is the social content manager for the National Rugby League down there in Australia. And welcome to the podcast today, Reece.
Yo, hello Neil. How are you, mate?
Doing awesome. Looking forward to picking your brain about all things NRL, social media strategy, and I think it's really cool to have these conversations with people from around the world. I think here we get so bogged down with being in the States and like everything that happens in the States is the way that things happen around the world. And there are a lot of similarities, there are a lot of differences, and there are a lot of things that I've learned from talking to folks in Australia, New Zealand, and all over the world. So it's always fun to have someone from outside the U.S. on, and so I'm really psyched to pick your brain today, Reece. But before we get into the meat of our discussion, we want to hear about you. So tell us about your career path, how you got started in this crazy sports and social space, and how you got to your position with NRL today, and any tips for folks that want to do what you do.
Sure. Always loved sport. Grew up playing multiple sports. Basically graduated school and I wanted to get into sports, so I liked the idea of sports journalism. So I did a bachelor's degree in journalism down at Wollongong University. That was a 3-year period, and during that time I did a bit of work experience and an internship at one of the NRL clubs with their media manager. That actually came off the back. I was coaching a baseball team, and the son of the media manager was playing, and I was just writing match reports, and he sort of noticed that I could write, and he asked me what I was doing, and he's basically offered me to come down and do some work experience at the Sharks. So that's how that started, and did an internship at Fox Sports News as well. And then, after the journalism degree, I graduated, and a job basically popped up at the Cronulla Sharks as the media manager. I took that on, and it sort of turned into media, website, and social media manager all in one. That was back in 2009. So pretty early on in the social space. Was there for a couple of years, and quite low on resource. We had no CEO at the time. The team wasn't doing so well, and I sort of just was a little bit burnt out. So I went traveling with some mates to Europe for 4 months, and came back after that and started straight back up at a digital agency called Pillar. Was there for a few years. Basically, wore quite a few different hats there in project and account management, working across social media, web production, digital media marketing, content initiatives for agency clients. And then basically had enough there and started at the NRL as social media community manager. And have been there this is my 7th season at present. So I've sort of just built out along the way. It sort of evolved to being the social content manager now, which is nice. That's probably the crux of it.
Definitely fun to think how this space, being in sports and social, definitely keeps you young. No matter how long you've been in the space, you feel like you're just getting started because things change every single day.
Yeah, definitely. And, I never started out to, get into social media. It's sort of just, I was the young one at the Cronulla Sharks. It was in the sort of the media world, and, took on the role of looking after the social channels, and it went from there basically. So
I'm tempted. I kind of want to do a whole episode just on the 4 months in Europe. That sounds super fun, but
there's a lot of stories there.
I can only imagine. So I guess give our listeners an idea of where the NRL, where the National Rugby League fits within the sort of the sports ecosystem. If people are not aware, first off, Australia is a sports mad country. I mean, the teams per capita is absurd to me in a good way. It's awesome to see all the fandom out there in the professional sports. But let's give an idea of what other leagues are at the same levels in NRL, or where the NRL kind of fits. Out here we have kind of our big four: NBA, MLB, NFL, NHL, MLS is coming up as well, among others. Give us kind of the NRL 101 in terms of where it fits and all that.
Yeah, sure. So the NRL, for those that probably don't know, it stands for National Rugby League. So it's a form of rugby, I guess. But rugby league is different to rugby union. It's probably easy for outsiders to say they are similar, but to be honest, although they use a similar shaped ball, they've got quite different rules, concepts, interpretations, and rugby union's probably more a global sport. It's big on a global stage, but it's not as big here. So we've got 2 major football codes in Australia, I'd say. Soccer fans won't like hearing that, but the NRL and AFL are the 2 major football codes, particularly from a broadcast perspective as well. Soccer at an elite level probably isn't as popular here, but it's got massive junior participation, and a lot of fandom with the EPL. A lot of Aussies have an EPL team, whether it's Liverpool, Man U, Man City, Tottenham, whoever it is. It's probably the go-to league for a lot of soccer-loving Australians. So the A League is the elite competition here, but it's definitely not on the same level as, say, the NRL and AFL. So NRL is probably it's most popular in New South Wales and Queensland, on the East Coast. So Sydney, Brisbane, Gold Coast, Townsville. We also have a team down in Victoria, in Melbourne, which is where the AFL's more popular. So AFL sort of goes across Victoria, South Australia, and Western Australia. They've got a couple of teams in Sydney and Queensland, but it's sort of that southern region of Australia is where AFL is more popular.
Is there like an AFL NRL like rivalry? Are they different parts of the year? Are fans of both? Or are they usually one or the other, like more strongly?
Traditionally, probably one or the other. I think. I I think now it's becoming a little bit more usual or normal for someone to be a fan of an NRL team and AFL, but it's definitely, usually if you follow NRL, you'll follow NRL and not really take too much of an interest in AFL. You might have a team and keep an eye on things, but I think as a whole, it's probably like that. Victoria's probably the only Melbourne's probably the only team that, it's such a heavy AFL dominated state that everyone's got obviously an AFL teams that they support, but they'll also support the one rugby league team in the Melbourne Storm down there. So yeah, we've got 16 teams in the NRL and there's 9 in Sydney alone. So the rest sit across New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria, ACT. So I personally support the Cronulla Sharks, which is right on the east coast of Sydney or South Sydney. And that's basically, that's where I grew up. So yeah, that's probably an overview.
And this we'll get into the weeds a little bit more as we go, but I want to spend one question in the weeds before we move on, and that is, like, at the NRL, are you guys actively courting AFL fans to become bigger or just become fans in general of the National Rugby League? Or because, hey, they're sports fans, they like going to games, they like the experience, maybe they like betting on sports or whatever it might be. Are you guys looking more to, like, that's our best prospect fans, or is it not quite like that where you're trying to convert fans oftentimes?
Yeah, I'm not sure we're looking to convert. I think, if someone loves a sport, it's very hard, or a particular league, it's very hard to turn them over to just liking our league. I think, what our goal is to, if they've got an AFL team, great, but you can also have an NRL team. So I wouldn't say we're actively courting, but it's definitely something we're wary of. And I think the AFL, from a grassroots level, probably have the hold over the NRL in terms of, getting into schools and doing community visits and that sort of thing. The NRL certainly do it, but I think the AFL probably do it better in terms of, hitting the big regional areas in particular where there's, high participation levels.
Mm-hmm. So let's take a step back and look at a kind of a bird's eye view of the NRL, of the NRL social team, of each club's social presence as well for the NRL. And I just give me an idea of how the league functions, and then also what the sophistication level or resource level is like at each team, and if it maybe it varies quite a bit based on the club, or maybe it doesn't. So where does social fit, and how strongly resourced is the league and its individual teams?
Yeah, so it's a very good question. We're definitely not very well resourced here. I think Clubland particularly is quite under resourced, which is unfortunate. I think there are a couple of teams that do it really well and really resourced well, but I think we're still quite a while behind, say the States in terms of resourcing, understand the power of social. I think budgets are quite low, and I know in Clubland there's quite a lot of turnover or burnout, which is tough. So you might have a social media team at a club for a season or two, but no doubt it'll be a new set of staff in 2 or 3 years. So it's really hard to sort of form relationships with a lot of the clubs because there is such a high churn. Through of talent. There's a few clubs that probably, like the Melbourne Storm, are probably the best in terms of their structure of their social team. They've sort of got a head of the social and brand marketing type role, but they've got a video editor, they've got a set of graphic designers, they've got some producers. Whereas a lot of teams, there's a lot of people just wearing multiple hats. They might probably have 2 people that work across website, video design, social producing live game coverage. So it's pretty full on, and that's just from being in Clubland myself and learning from experience. You don't have a lot of support, and you seem to be working as you do in social media really hard 24/7, both during and the off season. In terms of the NRL setup, we got to a point pre-COVID last year where we're in a really good spot. We had 8 staff within the social media team, sort of right across from, our social lead to myself sort of managing the content output side of things, working with designers, video editors. So we had a video editor, some producers, and a couple of casual staff that would work across the weekend as well on live game coverage, but we took a bit of a hit. So we're at about 4 staff now. So there's myself, a head of social casts, and then a couple of producers, which is tough. It's really hard to do a good job and manage all of the channels correctly. I think we don't even have a video editor within our social team. We rely on the NRL.com team for any video requests that we need, and we have to really think in advance and plan in advance with them to be able to get the content that we need to push out at certain times of the year. So, for now, like basically at the moment, we're planning our off season, what content we need for our off season with the NRL.com team. And even those guys themselves are quite under resourced. So COVID hasn't been too kind to us, nor has it been kind to, a lot of businesses. We've taken a bit of a hit there. So we've sort of had to focus more on the bigger picture than, churning out a lot of content, which is probably a good thing anyway. But yeah, that's where we sort of sit at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, you and I kind of both got into the space around the same time when social was first becoming a thing. I mean, you at the Sharks and me out here in the States, and back then social was more of like a curiosity. Yes, it's nice. We don't really know how it fits into the business quite yet. For some, it was communications. For some, it was a marketing tool. For some, it was a combination. So, like, what has held back, or I guess, what is the buy-in like for social in Australia in general, and as well as at the across the clubs for the NRL? Like, is it still like a battle where you're like, hey, social can drive revenue, fan engagement does help create fans, drive ticket sales, drive merchandise, or is it still kind of thing where it's social is a throw-in and social is something that we do in addition to everything else we do? It's just kind of like, where does social fit in kind of that strategic mindset? Is it elevated in the way that it's becoming more elevated here in the States?
Yeah, I think it's slowly getting to that, but I think we're quite a while away. I think it's still definitely a battle for our team, just to get staff on board. The fact that our social team doesn't have a video editor alone. A video editor alone is speaks for where we're sort of at. Right. Graphic design. We have a designer who we have access to. Probably 80-90% of the time, but they don't sit within our team. So, I think it probably depends on what business or you're sort of talking about or what team. But I think as a whole, social is probably an afterthought for a lot of businesses and executives still, which is unfortunate. It's a constant education process. I think there are quite a lot of people that do understand the importance and value of a solid content or social media strategy, but there's definitely a lot of clubs or executives or teams that don't quite understand the value of it. And I'm not sure I think that's purely based out of not being as educated, or they haven't been brought up in a world of social, so it's not something that they probably think is as important as, say, the traditional marketing side of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can understand that. Do you guys look at the States, look at EPL clubs, and yeah, you may not have the resources of an NBA team or league or a Premier League team or league, but do you guys look to them, or you look at clubs that are, whether it's in Australia or at a lower level that are maybe more equal to you in terms of resource?
Yeah, no, or on a personal level, I definitely look at the States. I keep an eye on, what teams and leagues and clubs do, but I probably myself follow more the creators themselves. So I'll follow, a bunch of graphic designers, a bunch of motion designers, a bunch of illustrators, a bunch of video editors, all from across the States, where I don't really mind what team they're from. Like, if I see a good piece of content on, particularly Twitter, that's probably where I find a lot of my inspiration and look to. I really try and cherry pick what each team does best and basically bring it all together from each team to form, a pretty holistic sort of strategy for our social. We're fortunate we have got, we have had some decent sort of budget over the last couple of seasons where we have been able to use freelancers, freelance creators and agencies and all that sort of thing. I probably lean towards more freelancers and agency, just out of a cost,
Right.
because agencies do cost quite a little bit. So I'll work with, if I like a designer or see a designer on Twitter that I like, I'll literally reach out to them and hit them up and see if they're interested in doing some freelance work with us. So I've got a little bit of a pool of guys that I work with, depending on what piece of content I want created, which is nice. So yeah, I definitely look towards states and in particular, and not just the elite level. College. There's a lot of amazing college creators as well, which are great. So yeah, that's where I look to for my inspiration, and I form lists and lists on. I've got a list on Twitter of social creatives and marketing sort of talent, basically that I follow, and that anyone can follow. It's public, so
Yeah.
I basically add anyone that pops up that works at in Clubland or for a team or whatever. I'll add them to that and just sort of keep an eye on that list. And I use bookmarks quite a lot as well. So if I like something that an idea or a piece of content that I think might work down the track for something else, or I can put my own spin on it, I'll bookmark it and save it for later. I probably need to get the paid version of bookmarks, because I've got that many. I sort of get lost in it now.
That's one reason to get Twitter Blue, I think it's called, right?
Yeah, Twitter Blue. But I mean, look, from when I first started in 2015, we only had a digital and social media manager, which was Matt Henry. I'm not sure if you may know or have heard of him. He's probably one of the smartest and most knowledgeable guys in the digital sporting landscape in Australia. And then we had one community manager or producer who actually worked with that in agency land. So in terms of headcount, there was really only 3 of us in 2015 that managed social right across the board. So internal structure was still pretty, the bare bones, but we worked with an agency called VML as well for a couple of years there, just to help us out with resource, particularly around, I guess, our tentpole moments or major events, particularly State of Origin, which I'm not sure if you've heard of State of Origin.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, that's basically Australia's greatest sporting rivalry, biggest sporting rivalry. It's Queensland versus New South Wales, state v state. It's a 3-game series that sees the best players in each state play against each other during the middle of the season. It's kind of like an All-Stars concept, but it's it means a lot more to the players. It's a lot more intense. There's genuine hatred for each other. And the event's been around for 30 years now. It's that one sporting event that even if you don't follow NRL or rugby league, people will still watch it with their mates. I think a big part of that's due to it's quite an aggressive, brutal type of game. It's just a different level to the NRL. It's just that next step up where it's the best v best. It's just a different beast. And although it's still aggressive, but people would definitely tune in because there was some sort of like brawl or fight that would break out, and fans just go nuts for it. And I get, yes, State of Origin, it's still the highest rating television show every year on free to air, including non-sporting programs. So that's sort of where it sits within Australia. It's just that, and internally we're probably not meant to say it, but State of Origin is seen as the pinnacle, seen by the players probably as the pinnacle of rep footy. It's much bigger than, I'd say, international rugby league. And if a player had to choose whether they played for Australia or in State of Origin at present, I reckon a lot of them would probably say Origin, as crazy as that sounds. Australia, obviously, it's very prestigious and honourable to play for your country. And I definitely think a lot of players would still probably say Australia over state, but I reckon a majority of them would say Origin. It's just got that. It's just a different breed of game. And honestly, if Americans knew more about NRL or even State of Origin, they'd go nuts for it. It's the NFL on roids with limited breaks. It's pretty full on.
Oh, that's the kind of stuff that folks working in content and social, that's why a ton of fun, because you get all the great storylines and great highlights and content. That sounds like one of the key tentpole events, along with others as well. So I kind of want to use that as a way to look at when you are looking at some of those awesome creatives in the States or elsewhere, from your curated list and bookmarking stuff as you go, and you need to decide, hey, this is a really cool motion graphic, or I really love this design, or this is a cool video concept. And you have to then look at, do we have the time? Do we have a budget for a freelancer? This is what, like, how do you determine, hey, here's a cool motion graphic that we could use for the opening of the season or for the grand final? And like, what goes into those decisions of, this is worth the time it will cost, or this is worth the budget it will cost? Like, how do you make those decisions on where you can innovate, where you can spend more time and resources on your content?
Yeah, it's a good question. We get, obviously, Cass, our head of social, sort of sets a budget, and I'll sort of lean on her to get an understanding of what I've got to work with. I'm basically the one that will decide where the money goes, I guess. So, if I've got 40K, then, I'll break that down to say, let's work with, so-and-so on this motion piece or illustration piece. So I'll try and brief in or work with our internal designer on a lot of the, everyday BAU type work that is quite straightforward and doesn't need a whole lot. Or it's probably easier for someone that understands the game to work on that sort of stuff with constant changes and stuff. But then it's really up to me what I sort of, we'll brainstorm ideas and what we want to do, and then we'll go from there. And, if I've got 10K to spend on emotion design, I'll set out what we can actually use that on, whether it's, a kickoff graphic, whether it's a game day graphic, whether it's a series of head-to-head graphics or wallpapers. I'll just sort of divvy that up into different sections from, illustration, motion, general graphic design, cartoon character type work. And go from there. But
are you almost like checking off in your head, like, hey, this is something that we'll be able to use multiple times? I mean, we can turn it into a bit of a template, or this is something we'll be able to use around this event, around this event, around this event, and just making sure that you're kind of getting the bang for your buck, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. If like we want a suite of graphics, like it's very rare that I'll brief in sort of one ad hoc random graphic, unless it's probably like an illustration or a cartoon character type piece of content. So if I do work with a freelancer, I'll give them a suite of graphics. So they might work on, say for State of Origin, there's 3 games, so they'll work on the 3 game day graphics. They'll then work on a head-to-head sort of player focused stats type graphic. They'll do the full-time template. They will do the champions type illustration or graphic as well, so that they'll have a suite that they sort of work to, and I just sort of flash that out within Google Docs in a spreadsheet, and then allocate what we'll do internally versus what we'll do externally.
Yeah, like with these days too, there's such a demand for content across platforms, and you have like stuff that is, you can maybe repurpose a graphic from Twitter to IG stories if you just change the specs a little bit or whatnot. But when you mentioned like having not as many people to do video, not as many resources on a match day, so like, does that require you to be really, I guess, thoughtful about, hey, we maybe can't prioritize TikTok as much because we're going to get more bang out of Instagram, and that's what we can service? Or like how do you ultimately divvy up resources across platforms, and how does that relate to ultimately like how you look at the success of your strategy?
Yeah, I think we've got more of a collaboration approach with the whole business now. So we'll work really closely with, say, marketing and events. So if we've got some animations that we'll want to put out, someone scores a try, we'll use, obviously the events team will use animations on the big screen. So how do we work with them to recreate, a 4x5 or a 9x16 on our platforms? And how that sort of translates onto the social. So instead of creating a whole new animation or motion graphic for just social, we'll work with the events team on how that looks on the big screen, and then how we can showcase that on social as well. So we're not doubling up essentially on resource or budget.
Yeah, I like that.
And that's the same with the marketing team. We'll sort of work on, they've got their sort of own designer, so we'll work with them on what the marketing sort of team can do for us, what they need, and then how that also translate onto social and where we can use that. And so too, we've got our own set of graphics. So what we design, we'll pass on to the marketing team, potentially with a different spin for any of their paid stuff or digital billboards or that sort of stuff. And then we'll also pass it on to the NRL.com team. They might want to include a graphic within a story, or use it as their hero image on a story as well. So it's due to COVID and the lack of resources we have now, or I shouldn't say lack of, limited resources we have. There's a lot more of a collaboration approach across different teams, so we can save time and not double up on resource and money, essentially.
Yeah, no, I there's a lot in there like that totally makes sense. I think over the last year with the pandemic, you had this realization that, hey, we're not going to have fans at games, largely, at least in the States, and we want to recreate the in arena or in stadium atmosphere. So let's say that those same animations that were going up on the video board, let's try those on social. And hey, that's a pretty good idea. And now we're also seeing a little more cross pollination, to your point of, we're creating stuff for social. We may not have as many resources as we would like to. So the same stuff we're doing for social can be tweaked or repurposed for some paid social ads or some digital advertising, or some email marketing. And it's great to hear that you guys are maximizing what you can with your resources and opening those lines of communication and collaboration.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we probably learned from a couple of years ago, there was so much doubling up on a lot of content. So that was a big reason why is marketing doing this when we're also doing this? Let's just have a uniform approach across the board that we can use and share content where appropriate. And we're not going to use everything that marketing create or events create, or they're not going to use everything we create, but where we can manage that output and workload, let's do it.
Yeah. And let's look at your team with the NRL as well. Like when you step back for your social team, you, Cass, and the others you work with, are you guys do you guys see yourselves as, hey, we are the representatives of the National Rugby League? It's our job to bring attention to league-wide events, to drive general tune-in, drive general ticket sales, or are you more, we are here to amplify what the clubs are doing and help them and maximize their social? Is it a combination thereof? What are sort of how does that strategic framing work for your team, and what are the overall goals?
Yeah, probably more the first with that. I mean, we do work with clubs and amplify club content where we can, but I don't think we're at where we should be with that. And I think that is due to a high turnover in clubland, that people, there's just that relationship constantly needs to be rebuilt each year with different clubs. So I guess our underlying goal of our channels is that we want to use content to drive engagement for the purpose of entertaining fans and delivering best in class fan experiences. So if our content is driving fan engagement builds relationships. Relationships obviously builds trust, and then trust drives revenue. So, and I guess each channel has its purpose to do that in a different way. For me, I'm quite creative minded, so I've always had a fan first approach, or put myself in fan shoes. What do I want to see? And I feel that's why we've been able to build such a large and engaged audience over the last 6 or 7 seasons. So we're now in a position where our content can be monetized. I've got an amazing relationship with Cass. We're pretty honest with each other about different ideas. I feel like we complement each other quite well. We may not always agree on the same thing, but we definitely respect each other's opinion, and a majority of the time we're on the same path. So we obviously need to promote our major events, work with the marketing team on that. We've got special rounds, women in league round, Indigenous round. We've got an all-stars match at the start of the year. We have rep football, sort of Australia, the women's league as well. So, a lot of our content also ties back into general tune-in to our broadcast, helping push that broadcast message for our partners. Tickets and merch is obviously a big area, but that's probably more in the paid space. And then, I guess the hardest thing about working in social is that it's constantly changing. There's new platforms that pop up. Algorithms are every 6 months is a new change, and you've just got competition. So much more competition. how the social landscape, I guess, looks today. Our content doesn't only compete against other sports in the country or other brands in our category. We compete against every brand.
Totally.
Period. Every single social media account, all of YouTube, Netflix, TikTok, we are competing against all entertainment content in general for eyeballs. So we need to make sure our content has to be so good for people to engage with that, we're focusing probably more on the bigger picture than worrying about pumping out a lot of content now, which is probably what we're doing, quite early on in the piece. We probably lack the community management or proactively starting conversations with our fan base at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Now we did have a community manager pre-COVID that did a bit of that, but it's just something as important as it is, and it's, to be honest, it should be a must. We just don't have someone that's dedicated towards that, so I guess it's more a few of us managing and looking after that side of things as well.
It takes people, for sure.
Definitely, and there's a few, there's a couple of meme pages or brands within the NRL space that literally have built their brand on building community, and they do such an amazing job. And you can just see how important it is for businesses or brands to be interacting and engaging with their fans on a regular basis.
Yeah, I mean, it's at least good to know that the fans are there and having those conversations. And if you ever get the opportunity to have that community manager back, there's no shortage of opportunity to engage that community from the NRL.
Yeah, definitely.
When you guys are crafting that content, and I like the way that you described it, are you guys trying to kind of amplify what is given to you? Meaning like, hey, there's some really cool highlights, or here's a cool storyline that fans are talking about. Are you also balancing in storylines that you want to get out there of, hey, here's a brand strategy, here's a mission statement that we want to get out there? Or how do you kind of work with that proactive versus reactive content? And how's it kind of fit into to where you guys spend your time?
Yeah, it's probably a mix of both. I'd say we're probably more on the reactive side of things. But I mean, we obviously also have to be quite proactive with a lot of our campaigns and events. Our planning is done, well in advance, months and months in advance for a lot of events. So our off season is essentially the crux of our off season is essentially already set in terms of what we're pushing out in what week, and what we require from designers, our own team, video editors, and that sort of thing. So we've obviously got storylines where we'll work with the media team and the head of marketing on, let's say the vaccination push at the moment. Obviously, we're pro-vaccination. The NRL's pushing hard for everyone to be vaccinated. So we've had a campaign around that. So we'll work with the marketing team, and the head of media as well on what that actually looks like, and working with players on that content and filming to push that out in at the moment that's sort of happening. It's a mix of proactive and reactive. I think naturally in sport, a lot of news happens so that you can't plan for, so it's very reactive.
That's the beauty of it.
Yeah, but to an extent we definitely plan ahead of time where we can and set storylines. Definitely.
Now here's hoping that the vaccination messaging works well, because for any listeners out there, they can kind of sympathize or empathize with Reece, who is currently stuck in lockdown with a lot of Australia, as you guys wait out the Delta variant kind of taking off a little bit there. I want to just a couple more minutes left here with Reece Carter, social content manager for the National Rugby League. Reece, I don't know where the time is flying by, man. We got so much more to cover.
That's all right.
Something that I've certainly noticed just from consuming content myself for the NRL is you guys do a great job of including your athletes. And I don't know if there's some really cool athletes that are awesome to work with, and doing Q&As and getting on camera. I guess first off, how do you characterize sort of the marketing of athletes and popularity of athletes versus the popularity and marketing of teams? Like kind of looking at maybe how the NBA is becoming more of a superstar-driven league versus, and you root more for players than for teams, or is it more the other way around where it's more I root for the team and less about the player? And then I guess coming off of that, what accounts for the awesome content you guys are able to create, co-create with players?
Yeah, so to start with, we're probably more a team first sort of vibe. Like if you support a team, it's for the team, not necessarily the player. Obviously, everyone's got their favorite players, but traditionally, if a player leaves, they won't really be followed. They'll probably then be hated in Australia. So it's it's not like the LeBron situation, or you don't just follow a player here in the NRL. You follow a team. It's very very tribal. I think that's pretty easy to distinguish here in Australia.
So even with that, Reece, when you guys are really pushing like a big national match, it's this player versus this player squaring off on Saturday night, or is it really this team versus this team, and the players may not be like the main headline?
Yeah, it's probably a mix of both. To be honest, it probably depends on the team. There's a couple of teams that definitely have some strong rivalries and traditional rivalries. The Sydney Roosters versus the South Sydney Rabbitohs is one. They both teams started back in 1908 and have had a rivalry ever since. They're sort of situated basically demographically next to each other, geographically, I should say, next to each other. But when we promote games, there is that team element, but I think there's the player element as well. Kalen Popback, two fullbacks coming up against each other. There's definitely that mouth-watering sort of matchup side of things as well that we promote. There's a lot of good players that come up against each other that head-to-heads that are definitely worth promoting rather than team v team. It's really dependent on who's playing, what time of the year it is, what type of match it is, etc. So you definitely promote those head-to-head matchups, definitely.
And then let's hear about how you guys do collaborate with players on some of the great content that I've watched probably way too much of in Instagram stories in particular.
Yeah, pretty lucky. I sort of get to go into a lot of the camps during the season. It's obviously been a little bit harder over the last year or two, but wherever possible, I'll go into an all-stars camp with the team. I'll go on tour with the Australian Kangaroos team for a World Cup or a Four Nations tour. So I get to be embedded within camp and work with the players directly. I think it's quite hard for us at the NRL in general because we don't have access to we have limited access to players when they're playing for their clubs, but when they get to the representative stage, we're sort of leading the charge there, where we can have someone in camp working with them. And I guess it's these relationships aren't built in 1 or 2 years. It's taken a solid 7 years to get to where I am. And even our chief photographer, Chucky, or Chuckstagram on Instagram, who is a freak photographer, he's been in the game for 20 odd years now, and he's got a really really good relationship with players that if the NRL needs something, a lot of the time they'll go to him or myself to get content while we're in camp. They won't go through the team manager or the media manager. They'll just ask us. So we've just built relationships with players over time and earned their trust. I think it's very easy, obviously, to be burnt by certain sections of the media. So you become familiar. If you're in camp with someone, you become quite familiar with them and get to know them. And we're similar sort of ages as well, where we we enjoy the same things and sort of can talk about the same things. And they just see us as one of the boys, essentially. You'll go to dinners with them, or coffee in the morning, or have lunch with them, or go to the beach, or whatever it is when you're on camp. But you'll also, be able to get that real solid direct access to them whilst, working.
Is it the type of thing too where like is the league's platform bigger than most of the players' individual platforms, and it's almost like if you amplify them, it's going to help them more than vice versa. If they were to retweet you or whatever it might be, or share your Instagram post, like how does that look in terms of like the level of just notoriety and level of potential reach of each platform?
Yeah, I think the NRL is probably bigger as a whole. In terms of engagement, players are obviously always going to get a higher sort of engagement rate than a league or a club. I think that's just it is what it is, and that won't change ever, which is a good thing. But I think the NRL, with the audience size and growth that we've had over the last 6 or 7 years, it's we've got into a place where, if a player, we've got players inboxing us, asking us to post photos of them on Instagram and tagging their accounts so they can grow their followers. There's a lot of players this year who have, wanted a blue tick, who are sort of new on the scene, and they're just stinging for a blue tick, basically to be verified. So, yeah, I think the NRL still holds the power. There's obviously a few marquee players that probably don't need that support or promotion. But as a whole, I'd say, if the NRL tags them, they get pretty excited or about getting some new followers.
How kind of savvy and generally interested and engaged in social are the players? Has that changed over the course of the pandemic, or are they equivalent to like a lot of the U.S. athletes where they're pretty on top of their platforms? Is it more of like maybe the youngest of the youngest are, but the older generation is still kind of, social's an afterthought for them?
Yeah, I think definitely the older generation, it's an afterthought. There are a couple of smart players who utilize their platform in certain ways, but the youth definitely. I feel like a lot of them are on the platform but don't quite use it. They definitely don't take advantage of their current influence. I feel like a lot of players will retire and then start, trying to build their brand or focusing more on their brand or a product that they want to sell or their academy. But they should be doing that whilst they're playing sport from an early stage and maximizing their influence. Because if you're playing rugby league or NRL for 10 odd years and you do nothing and then finally retire and then go, oh, well, I should have taken advantage of it. So many players just miss the boat. No one, as sad as it is, there are a lot of players that no one really, unless you're like an absolute gun, marquee, Tom Brady-esque type player, that fans, the hardcore fans will obviously still follow you and like you to a certain extent, but a lot of them will drop off. They don't care what, ex players doing once they're retired. They just don't care. They've missed the boat. So I think, it's something I'm quite passionate about in building and helping players with their brands and maximizing the opportunity while they're playing sport. They're driving 5 times the level of engagement across, 5 to 10 times the level of engagement across their social audiences compared to clubs and sporting leagues. And brands. So it's still an education piece. I think there are definitely a few players that, there's probably not many that really understand the power of it. There are definitely quite a lot of active players on there that upload, but I don't think there are any that are quite intricate with their strategies. And I think that comes down to their player managers here essentially negotiate contracts and might get them a few appearances on a sports catalog TV show, and that's about it, or get a car deal, but they won't really get to a point where they're actively looking for partnerships or working with brands and bringing in X amount of dollars on certain campaigns or becoming brand ambassadors where they're making X amount of dollars over a certain period of time. So that's definitely an area that we're, as a whole, just not the NRL, but just as a whole, I think actually quite a lot of the Australian Olympians do a really, really good job of social, and they really maximised their time whilst the Olympics were on, and especially with the quick turnaround with 3 years to the next one. I think this is a big period for them. But yeah, I think NRL players can be doing a lot better on that sort of thing, and they should be employing or working with community managers or marketing managers to build up their community and engagement, and then off the back of that, monetizing their brands.
Yeah, and I know it's close to your heart, something that you're not even talked about offline a little bit, of getting the players to be more proactive and understand the value of it all. One more quick thing, and then we'll get to those terrible stat, but I definitely want to hear this. And I guess looking at the states and the social coverage that we have, where there's a lot of memes, there's a lot of savageness and snark and sarcasm. I guess do those same themes tend prevail in Australia when it comes to SM sports or social media sports in Australia? And are there other things in Australia that are much different that you don't see in the States?
Yes, we have a massive meme culture here. I think we've got a pretty relaxed type of culture in Australia. I think it's the Aussie thing to do, to take the piss out of each other. It's not out of the norm. So I don't think there's any one platform as such. I think it's quite, the meme culture is quite big across every platform. If I had to pick one, probably Instagram. As I mentioned before, there are a couple of accounts here. One's called the NRL Roast, which essentially started out, they were roasting players, but I think they've sort of morphed and changed their strategy where they've become quite popular with fans, and just having a lighthearted chat about anything and everything rugby league, or even just sport in general. There's another one called Bloke in a Bar, which is actually a former player, NRL player, who launched his own beer called Bloke in a Bar. But he has literally built a community on social around meme culture and just talking about rugby league, where now his Bloke in a Bar is just thriving so much because everyone just loves him, because he just is a genuine, down to earth, very relatable human being that just enjoys having a chat about footy and having a laugh. So they've both built up a very engaged community, and they pump out I couldn't tell you how many pieces of content they pump out, but the fans absolutely go nuts for it.
That's awesome. Oh man, I could go down the subject rabbit hole all day. It's so fascinating to me to see the sort of the cultural crossover and how it pollinates across countries, and how we're all slowly becoming all about memes and GIFs and snark across the world, I guess, in the sports world.
Yeah, and I think it's so hard working for a sporting league to tread the line of the meme culture and having lighthearted conversations with fans, but then you might have someone's got done for drink driving and there's a charge coming down, so you need to be putting out media releases and have a very level-headed sort of approach to that. So it's a real balancing act with that sort of content as well.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, it's fascinating to me, and it certainly is a challenge being on the league side where you are every day. Well, Reece, we're going to pick your brain even more in our extra time segment, but first, episode's Charitable Stat coming right up. Just a fantastic conversation with Reece Carter, again, social media content manager for the National Rugby League, the NRL. Really learned a lot from him, take away a lot of insights, a lot of questions to consider, a lot of great topics to consider. But we're going to have some more fun with Reece coming up, so stick around for that. But first, this episode's Shareable Stat. This episode's Shareable Stat looks at the recent Manning Megacast, the Peyton and Eli Manning Megacast option that is sort of the complimentary option on ESPN2 for the ESPN broadcast of Monday Night Football. And the shareable stat is that between Week 1 and Week 2, there was a 132% increase in the number of viewers for that Manning Megacast. And just what a phenomenal, thought-provoking stat to look at how all the chatter, all of the sort of the water cooler chatter, I guess you could say, on the social media platforms about what was happening with the Manning Megacast and all the clips that came out of it, all the storylines that came out of it, really drove people to tune in for that second one. Yet they had some great guests, just like they did in the first one. You had Gronk, you had Brett Favre, among others, and just a really cool, case study on how social media can truly drive tune-in. It's one of the primary goals oftentimes when you're speaking to, whether it's a National Rugby League account trying to drive tune-in for their major events, or a team or a league trying to drive tune-in for their national events, for their major games and events. And it's not just tune-in, but it's really how social media can be the tentacles to driving fan activity, to driving fans to do what you want them to do, and what they would want to do as well, because it's enjoyable. And you really look at how, first, the Manning Megacast is a factory of short-form clips that is perfect for social media, of storylines, of quotes, quick quotes, and quick anecdotes and stories that are just fodder for social media content and really drive that sharing, that FOMO of what's going to happen next. So how can you really develop that same feeling, whatever it is you're trying to promote, whether it's a live broadcast, and you're looking at how can this live broadcast be maximized to bring on those social media clips as well? How can you program for all platforms as much as possible when you can? Or how can you develop that feeling of FOMO, like I need to be there to experience it? And that in that case, Twitter is the second screen, or Instagram is a place where the clips go afterwards, wherever it might be, YouTube. So it's really cool to think about and just converse about that shareable stat. So again, 132% increase between Week 1 and Week 2 with the Manning Megacast on Monday Night Football. If you haven't seen it, check it out, because it really is just a factory of short form clips and stories and anecdotes that play perfectly on social media. All right, stick around because we're going to have some more fun coming up with Reece Carter of the National Rugby League. Right back from this episode's shareable stat, and I am joined once again on the podcast by Reece Carter. He is the social content manager for the National Rugby League. Reece, I had just a tremendous time picking your brain, talking about all things Australia, NRL, SM Sports. Are you now ready for some extra time?
Yep, let's hit it.
All right, number one, going back to your time working for the Cronulla Sharks. Tell me your favorite piece of content from your time there with the Sharks.
Ooh, that's a lifetime ago. Actually did a piece basically when I started, or just before I started with the Sharks, and I was sort of doing my work experience there with one of the players, Ben Ross. He actually broke his neck during a game and needed 3 surgeries. So I was lucky enough to actually, do a bit of a video feature with him during his recovery. So I sort of got to speak to the surgeon, the doctors, Ben himself. As a really, it was my first really visual piece of storytelling that I'd done, and I guess it really kicked things off for me, I guess. And I'm still mates with Ben now. He lives sort of just around the corner, and it was really nice to, I guess, share his story and build. That was probably my first relationship with an athlete, which was cool.
That's awesome. I mean, geez, after you cover a broken neck or neck surgery, everything else seems pretty easy after that.
Yeah, definitely. And he was really helpful and good with it. And he made a recovery and returned to rugby league, which is nice.
That's awesome. All right, number 2. This might be a tough one here. Tell me the non-Australian sports league or team whose social media content you most admire and why. So non-Australian one.
Non-Australian. Good question. There's probably a few. I love what the Chargers do. You can just tell that they operate on there's another level across the board. Whether it's their fun personality on Twitter, their viral videos with the schedule release that they did with their recent All Access pieces. Their schedule release and their recent All Access pieces. Their design and animation in particular is dope. You can just tell that they get what social engagement is all about. Love the design work of the Brooklyn Nets. Not sure if it's just the black and white color scheme that I love, but their work is always just clean, sharp, consistent. So too probably the Panthers, Carolina Panthers. Sort of a real minimal. Use lots of white space, just clean. Clemson Tigers really have liked their video work in recent seasons. Their hype packages that they put out at straight fire. The TikTok, the MLB and UFC probably. They have a real variety of content they put out. The Bulls also do an amazing job with Benny the Bull.
Yeah.
The All Blacks. I probably have to give a mention to the All Blacks in New Zealand. They've got a great account. It's probably hard to nail sort of one.
I was a hell of a great list right there to begin with.
I think a lot of teams do channels or platforms very well. So you sort of have to take a little bit of everything from different teams to put it all together. But as I mentioned before, I probably follow more the creators themselves.
Yeah. Some great call outs there, and they certainly have some really talented people working for them to create all that stuff. Yeah. Number 3, this is a fun one. Tell me your favorite social media mantra or guiding principle, something that's a lesson or a mantra that kind of sticks with you.
Ooh, I think for me, creating and sharing content really connects and resonates with your audience. I think I saw something on a little quote on Twitter the other week. I'm not sure who it was from. It was like, ask yourself, does this piece of content, is anybody really going to care about it? And I think it's such a really good way to look at it, because I think you get caught up in just creating content for the sake of creating content. Sometimes you've just got to make sure there's, you do it properly, it has a purpose and or provides value to the business, not just doing it to tick a box. That's probably a good one that I have definitely taken on more and more over the last couple of years, just focusing on really good pieces of content rather than pumping out a lot.
Yeah, I like that a lot. It's a really important thing to keep in mind as we just think about that. More is always better somehow, or when you really do have to make the most of your resources, and you have to choose what content is worth producing and what content is just, like you said, just doing it for the sake of doing it. That's great. Number four for you, Reece. Tell me, we hit on this a little bit. Maybe it's just a combination of a lot of Twitter lists. But tell me your advice, your secret to keeping up with social media best practices and new features and trends in the space.
Yeah, Twitter lists, is definitely a big one for me. It could be public or private. You can add people accounts, that provide inspiration or education even for you, and not just in the sporting space. You might be into horse racing or a completely different sport, or into crypto or shares or whatever. You can
Yeah.
just create a list based off, influencers or people that you sort of admire, or learn from. So that's a big one. As I mentioned, I use bookmarks and save tweets for different pieces or ideas that I love. Follow industry leaders and commentators, like yourself, Jess Smith, Matt Kobach, and don't necessarily pigeonhole yourself to sport either. I think have a look at what other industries are doing: fashion, music, FMCG, all that sort of thing. And then, if you're into podcasts and blogs, subscribe to, podcasts or blogs that I guess keep you up to date. Even if it's 10 minutes when you first wake up, or 10 minutes before you go to bed. Front Office Sports or Hashtag Sports, both great platforms. I think, just try and draw as much inspiration from, other creators and leaders in the space, and look to different countries.
I like that. Lots of good stuff in there. It really can be like a full-time job just to keep up with everything, and you have to know what you're doing. And I Twitter lists are great, and bookmarks, like you said, and maybe we'll see what happens with Twitter communities, with that being the newest thing. And maybe one day Instagram will let us create lists as well. One day we can dream.
Hopefully. Yeah, I think a lot of that's probably done. We don't really have office hours working as social. It's definitely not a 9 to 5 sort of job, but I think a lot of my inspiration probably comes, at night time, just doing the nightly scroll.
Totally. I forget who I was speaking with recently, but that came up where it's like, most people relax at night by scrolling through TikTok or through Instagram, and for this person was like, for me, I'm relaxing, but I'm also like taking notes and bookmarking things and saving things. So I'm getting ideas, and it's hard to that line between work and leisure is very blurry sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. And I think especially on TikTok, you can get just stuck in the vortex of watching videos for hours. And there's so many different creative people on there that
Seriously,
it's just astonishing how many different ideas you can take from that platform.
Reece is the perfect segue, kinda for number 5, our next question, and that is your advice on burnout and mental health. Being in this always on space, like how do you keep your sanity?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question for myself at the time. I'm 7 seasons into the NRL, so I'm probably at a stage now where I'm looking for a new challenge or new role in a different environment. Obviously still want to stay in the social and content space, but whether I'm not sure what the next steps are for me. But yeah, I think working in social, it's essentially 24/7. You never really fully unplugged as much as the bosses or executives tell you to unplug. It just doesn't happen. I think so often you're just consuming different kinds of media and information outside of work hours that bring your mind straight back to work. I think there's also the expectation internally as well, but from fans to be always pumping out content. If you're quiet for a couple of hours, fans sort of you're sort of expected to be just pumping out content, which isn't always the case. Especially here in Australia, as I sort of mentioned before, I'm not sure we fully understand the value of social media or what it takes to work in social and what's involved from a resource perspective. And I think when you're young, especially, working in sports, social media, just, you constantly, there's just no off button, you're making sure you, I think now that I've had the experience that I've had, I've made it a goal of mine to just clock off every now and then. And, otherwise you'll just go mad and lose your love for it. I think they're probably the main ones. It's hard when you first start out because, our work is so public, it's there for everyone to see. Like every bit of content you push out or every bit of community engagement you put out, it's there for the world to see. So there's a lot of pressure for people, and you sort of want to do the best job you can, especially when you're starting out, to make to give a good impression to not only your fan base, but the internal team, or the business that you're working for, because they're on social too, and they're seeing the work you're putting out.
Yeah, and they're seeing the work that you're putting out. They're seeing the work that other leagues are putting out, the teams are putting out, and it's like you're always being measured up against them, and it's like I said, it's super tough, and you have to be willing to step back and know that it might be some whatever National Pizza Day, but it doesn't mean every fan is waiting for your National Pizza Day post as much as you might think they are.
Yeah, definitely. And I think if you raise a good point there, there's a lot of, you might get the odd internal comment saying, oh, well, like, why can't we do this, or what so-and-so is doing? Like, okay, well, do you have, 10K to spend on an agency to put together this amazing piece of video content or hype reel? Like, there's levels to content that people don't quite understand. Yes, you can put a hype package out, but I think there's levels to that hype package. It can be the pretty basic sort of montage of highlights, but when you get to actual storytelling in a piece of content with different sorts of effects, and there's just, that's probably my pet peeve. Like, can we do something like this? Yeah, well, we can, but do you have budget for it, or who's going to do it, or why have you left it to the day before?
Yeah, no, definitely a lot of people nodding in agreement right now and relating to that. All right, next up for you, Reece, tell me, besides the big five, I guess, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, what is the social media platform besides those that you most have your eye on for the NRL? I can name a few, but is there one outside of those big five that you guys are kind of keeping close eye on or trying out?
Yeah, I think Twitch for me, definitely. I think enabling the ability for influencers to play video games and create a full-time income from their passion. The phenomenon of esports has just taken over the entire world, and it's probably an area I need to become more educated on. Obviously understand the importance and how powerful it is, but I just need to wrap my head around the intricacies a little bit more of it all. We have quite a lot of NRL players who are actually gamers, and I think we'd be stupid not to look into it ASAP. I think it's just been a resource thing for us. Unfortunately, there's only probably so many channels that we can put our effort into and do a good job of it. Not, you can obviously have different, you'd be on multiple platforms, but if you're not doing a good job on all of them, you're better off focusing on 3 or 4 than
totally
6 or 7.
No, I like that. It's super interesting. That's another area that we could explore on round 2 of this podcast one day. Is the esports and gaming on there, and I guess that also is a good segue into the next question I have for you. And maybe this is a Twitch streamer, maybe it's not, but tell me the NRL player that we should all be following on social media right now, and which platform should we follow them on?
Yes, interesting question. I'll give you 2 for Instagram. Brian To'o, who goes under the name of Bizza, and Brandon Smith, who goes under the name of Hectic Cheese. They're
nice.
two probably of the 2 biggest characters in our game. The fans love them, even if you don't support the team they play for. They're just loved right across the board. They're just different characters. Brandon Smith, has a bit of fun with his head coach. He calls him his father, and it's sort of like a father-son combination. And they just, he likes stirring him up. So there's actually a video, an Instagram story, or a sequence of Instagram stories he posted the other day where they were unloading the bags off the coach, off the bus, and they had actually filled the coach's bag with like rocks or stones. And
I think I saw that actually.
Yeah. One of the boys was filming it, and the coach hasn't even noticed when he sort of picked the handle up of his bag and just walked off, and the boys are just laughing in the background. Those guys are funny. Brian Tor is just, I don't even know how to explain him. He's just a character. He can dance, he sings. He's a bit of everything. TikTok, I'd probably say Alex Johnston.
Okay.
He's really good. He's got a few different sort of skits that he does. you probably wouldn't think like in general he'd be entertaining on like social, but his stuff on TikTok is really, really funny and interesting and well worth a follow. I'll give a shout out to Chad Townsend. He's probably the most knowledgeable on social media in terms of understanding the importance and value of it as a player. He's probably not a marquee player as such, but he's definitely, he's a player that's a halfback for a team, and he was the first halfback that helped the Sharks win the grand final for me, and I'm mates with him. But he does a really good job across all social, but in particular YouTube. He uploads quite a lot of vlogs, so it gives a lot of behind the scenes type of content for fans to follow along, and fans really, really enjoy it and get a bit of a different feel for what it's like to be playing for a national, or sorry, a professional sporting body, especially when they're on the road traveling so much with COVID. They're probably Kalen Ponga is another one. He's probably the coolest sort of player in the NRL, or one of, sort of real relaxed, vibey. He's got a really, really good step on him. They call it a goose step, a goosey here. And, the younger generation really, really love him. And he uploads some probably more arty type of content, photos and behind the scenes sort of content. So that's probably my hit list for you.
Nice. No, that's a good list. Some fun ones to check out there for sure. I look forward to seeing them myself. More of them, at least. I've seen some of them. All right, next one for you, Reece. Coming toward the end here, and it's time for our food question, and we got to ask it. When I come out there to visit you out in the greater Sydney area, what's the best meal to get, and where will we get it?
For me, you can't go past a place called Bistecca. It's a pretty unique dining experience. It's sort of like a classic Italian cocktail bar and restaurant that basically is dedicated to a type of T-bone cut of steak, which is in Florence, a Florentine sort of steak.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sort of cut and weighed on the spot, depending on how much you want to order, and then presented to diners basically before it's being cooked, on fire over charcoal. I think I definitely reckon they've got this private room which you can book, and it sort of sits within their actual wine cellar, and it's really just set aside. It's really, really private. And it's just a really good vibe and dining experience. And their starters there are amazing as well. They've got this. I probably shouldn't spoil it, but they've got this candle that melts, and it's actually edible, and you dip this homemade focaccia bread into it, and it's just
wow.
It's
amazing.
Yeah, it's great. If I had to give you another one, that's probably more a casual vibe. I'd say it's a place called Toddy's. It's in the eastern suburbs in Bondi. It's more a casual type of Italian, but the menu's made up to share with friends or family. They're burrata and wood-fired bread. It's ridiculous.
Nice. Well,
that's my two tips.
I'm down for both places. I go ahead and reserve that private room for us in advance, so we'll be ready to go when I get there. Last one for you, Reece. This one might be the hardest question in the entire podcast. Tell me the Mount Rushmore of Australian athletes. So who are the four greatest athletes of all time that deserve to have their faces carved into stone?
Oh, geez. This is a really tough one. I'll probably talk to players that I guess I've grown up watching. I think let's start with NRL. I don't think I can personally split Cameron Smith and Darren Lockyer. Cameron Smith was a hooker, sort of like the smallest player, but in the forward pack who makes 40 plus tackles a game. He played a record 400 plus games, which is unheard of in the NRL. He's got the body of an accountant, they say. He's an accountant. He's obviously got a bit of muscle, but he's definitely not the biggest player. But he plays in the middle of the field, does all the dirty work, and he was the most durable. And his influence on a game, although he's probably not the most flashy player, he just could dominate a game and lead his side around the park like no other player in the comp. And then Darren Lockyer is like a halfback. He's sort of like the playmaker. He just was clutch. Any big game or big play that was needed, 9 times out of 10, he'd step up, and he could win a game on the siren with a field goal or a kick or a pass or whatever it was. I just think those two are probably the two standouts for me.
Mhm.
Cricket, Shane Warne, I'd say.
Yeah.
I think most of the world knows Shane Warne, but he had it all. He could play. He's a character. Golf. Golf's a hard one, but I'd probably have to say Greg Norman. Growing up, he was sort of the go-to golfer for me. Watching, there's
Definitely.
quite a lot now. There's a lot now that are quite famous. And when I say Cam Smith, there is actually a golfer called Cam Smith as well, who's very good at the moment. So don't
That's
get those two mixed up. Ian Thorpe, probably as a swimmer, he went to multiple Olympics and dominated. He's sort of like the Michael Phelps of Australia. They're probably the cricket. Yeah, Shane Warne. Who else? Tennis. I'd say Leighton Hewitt. He's probably the go-to for me. I love Nick Kyrgios. I don't think he's on Hewitt's level. He probably could be, if he went all in on it. But he's a bit of a character, and although a lot of people don't like him or haven't liked him in the past, he's sort of, I think he's growing up a little bit and becoming a little bit more liked here in Australia. I'll stop there because you could probably keep going on.
So plenty of good ones there. We'll run out of space on the mountain, but it's okay. We'll squeeze them in.
Yeah.
All right, Reece, had a great time in our extra time segment. Now your chance to take over the podcast. Tell us your social media all-star to follow. Just can be whoever. Tell us who they are, or what platform, and why they're worth following.
Sorry, can you say that one again? I missed what you said.
It's your chance now to shout out your social media all-star to follow. So it can be someone a thought leader, someone you like following that inspires you, whoever they are. Just tell us who they are and why they're worth following and on what platform.
Sure. In the industry, I'd say Jess Smith or Jess Eagle, I think, on Twitter. She puts out some regular content that it's really educational and highlights highlights a lot of the great content that teams and clubs are pushing out. And then I'm going to give Bloke in a Bar a shout out. He's an Australian, as I mentioned, beer brand before. He's got some great content, really relatable content for a sports loving Aussie, or just a sports lover in general. You probably won't understand half the lingo if you're not from Australia, but he's definitely worth a follow, I think.
And then how about you, Reece? Where can we find you as well as all things National Rugby League on digital social media? You
can find me on most channels: Instagram, Twitter, Reece_Carter. Pretty straightforward. LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn as well. And then the NRL is obviously just at NRL, basically on every channel, which is across Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram.
Check them out. They do a great job with content. Reece and his team do a phenomenal job, and it's so much fun picking your brain today, learning about Australia, NRL, all the stuff that you guys have going on out there, and cannot thank you enough for joining us on the podcast today, Reece.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much again to Reece Carter, social content manager for the National Rugby League, the NRL. It's a busy time for them as they have grand final week and the grand final coming up, but just such a delightful conversation. I've always enjoyed my interactions with Reece over the months and years, and time just flies by. We learn a lot from our friends on the other side of the world, and it's just great to be able to pick his brain and to learn a lot from him today, and we appreciate his time. But that'll do it for this episode of the Digital and Social Media Sports Podcast. Thanks again for listening. As always, I'm your host, Neil Horowitz. You can find me on Twitter at NJH287. We'd love for you to hit me up there. You can also hit me up on LinkedIn, where I post more content. The website is dsmsports.net, where you can find the archive and more content, and of course, follow or subscribe and check out the podcast on your preferred podcast platform. Until next time, this is Neil Horowitz signing off for the Digital and Social Media Sports Podcast.